The iron shackles bit into Arya's wrists as she stood on the wooden platform, her emerald eyes scanning the crowd of leering faces below. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the marketplace, describing her as if she were livestock, young, strong, good for breeding. She wanted to scream, to fight. But the metal collar around her neck reminded her that resistance had already cost her everything. 50 gold pieces, shouted a merchant with yellowed teeth. 70, called another, his gaze hungry and predatory. Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. 3 months ago, she had been a blacksmith's daughter in the village of Thornfield. Then the raiders came, burning everything, taking everyone who could be sold. Her parents had died defending their home. She wished she had died with them. The bidding continued, each number driving her deeper into despair. She thought of her mother's gentle hands, her father's proud smile when she'd helped him forge her first horseshoe. All of it reduced to this: her body as currency, her future as property. 100 gold pieces. The voice cut through the cacophony like a blade through silk. Deep, calm, authoritative. The crowd fell silent, turning to locate the speaker. Arya's eyes found him immediately: tall, dark-haired, with clothes that spoke of wealth, but bore the practical cuts of a man who knew hardship. His face was angular, weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they looked directly at her with something she hadn't seen in months. Respect. 100. The auctioneer's voice cracked with greed. Do I hear 110? The mysterious stranger stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword. No one else will bid. It wasn't a question or a threat, it was a statement of fact that somehow carried the weight of absolute certainty. The crowd shifted nervously. Arya studied her unexpected savior, noting the way other bidders unconsciously stepped back from him. There was something about his presence, an aura of quiet danger, that made hardened slavers lower their eyes. A scar ran along his left temple, disappearing into his hairline. His hands, she noticed, bore the calluses of a swordsman. Sold. The auctioneer's gavel fell with finality. As the stranger approached the platform, Arya felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. Was this simply a change of masters, or something else entirely? He climbed the steps with fluid grace, his movements speaking of trained warriors' discipline. When he reached her, he didn't grab her chains or examine her like the others had. Instead, he looked directly into her eyes. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, his voice meant for her alone. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her name in months. She was simply the girl, or the redhead, or worse. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "Arya." He nodded once, as if filing the information away as something precious. "I'm Marcus." He paused, then added words that made her heart skip. "You're safe now." The auctioneer approached, with the key to her shackles. But Marcus held up a hand. "Keep your distance." He produced his own set of keys lockpicks. She realized and began working on her bonds with practiced efficiency. As the iron fell away from her wrists, Arya felt something she'd thought lost forever. The first fragile stirring of hope. Marcus's estate lay 3 days' ride from the slave market. Nestled in rolling hills, covered with olive groves and wildflowers, Arya had ridden behind him in silence, her body tensed for whatever horrors awaited. She'd known masters who spoke kindly at first, only to reveal their true nature once behind closed doors. But as they approached the sprawling stone villa, she began to notice things that didn't fit her expectations. The grounds were immaculate, but not ostentatious. Gardens bloomed with both practical herbs and beautiful flowers. Most surprising of all, the workers in the fields looked up and waved as they passed, their faces bright with genuine affection for their employer. These were not the cowed expressions of the enslaved. How many others do you own?" Arya asked, her voice barely audible over the horse's hooves. Marcus glanced back at her, his storm-gray eyes unreadable. "None. Everyone here is free. They work for wages, live in their own homes, come and go as they please." The concept seemed impossible. Then why did I buy you? He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, as they reached the villa's main entrance, he spoke. "Because I couldn't leave you there." A woman emerged from the house, middle-aged, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. She wore simple but well-made clothing, and carried herself with the dignity of someone respected rather than subservient. "Alina," Marcus said, dismounting and helping Arya down with careful, non-threatening movements. "This is Arya. She'll be staying with us." Elena's face softened with understanding. "Of course. Come, child. You must be exhausted." She turned to Marcus. "The blue room, yes. And Alina, she's not. She's not property. She's a guest. Make sure everyone understands. That evening, Arya sat in a copper bathtub filled with hot water and scented oils, the first real bath she'd had in months. Alina had provided her with clean clothes, a simple dress of soft wool dyed deep blue that fit surprisingly well. When she emerged, she found Marcus waiting in the hall, but he kept his distance, his posture carefully not. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry," he said. "Alina prepared your favorites, though I suppose I don't know what those are yet." "You don't have to be so careful with me," Arya said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'm not made of glass." Something flickered in his eyes, approval perhaps. "No, you're not, but you've been treated like property for months. It will take time to remember that you're not." They sat in his study, a comfortable room lined with books and maps. Marcus poured wine but didn't touch his own cup, seemingly content to watch her eat bread and cheese with an intensity that spoke of long deprivation. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why spend 100 gold pieces on a stranger?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I was enslaved once. 7 years ago. Taken in a raid, much like you were." Arya's breath caught. "How did you escape?" "I didn't. Someone bought me. A merchant named Hadrian, who said the same thing to me that I said to you, that I was safe." His voice grew distant. "He was a good man. He gave me back my freedom, helped me rebuild my life. When he died, he left me this estate and a fortune I never expected. And now you do the same for others. When I can, though you single quotes read ... double quotes." He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "I'm what?" Marcus met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her pulse quicken, not fear, but something altogether more dangerous. "You're the first who's made me want to do more than just grant freedom. You make me want to give you a reason to stay." The weeks that followed took on a rhythm. Arya had never experienced the gentle cadence of safety and choice. Each morning, she woke in her own bed, in her own room, with her own key. The concept of privacy had become foreign during her captivity. Now she treasured it like a precious gem. Marcus made no demands on her time, established no expectations. He simply existed in the same space, a constant, reassuring presence, who never crowded, but never quite disappeared. She found herself drawn to the estate's rhythms, the morning bustle of the kitchen where Alina hummed while baking bread, the afternoon quiet of the library where dust motes danced in streams of sunlight, the evening conversations that grew longer and more intimate with each passing day. "You don't have to work," Marcus had told her that first week. "But if you want to, Alina could use help with the household accounts. She says you have a sharp mind for numbers." Arya had been surprised by her own eagerness to contribute. Months of helplessness had left her craving purpose beyond mere survival. She discovered she had a talent for organization, for seeing patterns in the estate's complex web of expenses and income. More than that, she found herself genuinely curious about how Marcus had built this place, this sanctuary of kindness in a world that had shown her mostly cruelty. The revelation came gradually, pieced together through overheard conversations and careful observation. Marcus didn't just free slaves, he systematically disrupted the entire trade network. His wealth came not from inheritance alone, but from strategic investments and calculated risks, all designed to fund his quiet war against the system that had once enslaved him. "The merchant ships carrying chains and shackles," she said one evening as they walked through the olive groves. "You're the one who's been buying them out, aren't you?" Alina mentioned that metal prices have been unusually high. Marcus smiled, the first genuinely amused expression she'd seen from him. "You've been paying attention. I've been wondering how one man could afford to buy so many people their freedom. The servants talk, you know. They're proud of what you do." "It's not charity," he said, his tone growing serious. "It's strategy. Every slave freed is a worker who can earn wages, buy goods, contribute to communities. Every slaver bankrupted is one less predator hunting the innocent." They had stopped, walking, standing now beneath an ancient olive tree, whose gnarled branches created a canopy above them. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and Arya found herself studying the planes of Marcus's face, the way the light caught the silver threads in his dark hair. "What happens when you run out of money?" she asked. "I won't. The investments are carefully planned. This estate is profitable on its own now, and I've diversified into shipping, textiles, even a small bank in the capital city." "And what happens when you run out of people to save?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the cedar soap he used, the leather of his riding clothes, the faint scent of ink from his morning correspondence. "I hope that day comes," he said quietly. "I hope I live to see a world where slavery is nothing but a dark memory." "And then what will you do with your life?" His hand rose, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. "I don't know. I've spent so long focused on this mission, I've never thought about what comes after." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But lately, I've been wondering if the answer might be right in front of me." Arya's breath caught. She knew she should step back, should maintain the careful distance that had defined their relationship thus far. Instead, she found herself leaning into his almost touched, her eyes closing as his fingertips finally made contact with her skin. "Marcus," she whispered, his name carrying all the questions she couldn't yet voice. "I know," he said, understanding, without explanation. "I know it's too soon, too complicated. I know you need time to remember who you were before they tried to break you. What if I don't want to remember who I was?" The words surprised her with their honesty. "What if I want to discover who I could be?" His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and she felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower seeking sunlight. "Then we'll figure it out together." The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a messenger whose nervous glances and hurried departure immediately set everyone on edge. Marcus read it in his study, his face growing darker with each line. When he finally looked up, Arya saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "Fear. What is it?" she asked, setting down the ledger she'd been working on. Marcus handed her the parchment, without a word. The message was brief, but chilling. "I know what you've been doing. I know who you have. Return my property, or I'll come take it back. Myself, Cassius Blackheart." Arya's hands trembled as she read. Cassius Blackheart. The name was whispered in slave markets across the kingdom. He was the most powerful slaver in the region, a man who owned dozens of ships and had the ear of corrupt officials. He was also, she realized with growing horror, the man who had originally captured her. "He's talking about me," she said, the words coming out flat and emotionless. "He can't have you." Marcus's voice carried an edge of steel she'd never heard before. "You're free. You're under my protection. Your protection." Arya laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, this is Cassius Blackheart. He has armies of mercenaries, connections in every port city, enough gold to buy judges and governors. What can one man do against that?" Marcus stood, moving to a cabinet she'd never seen him open. Inside were weapons, not just the sword he wore daily, but daggers, a crossbow, and something else that made her blood run cold. A set of papers bearing official seals. "I'm not just one man," he said quietly. "I'm a Knight of the Silver Rose, chartered by the crown to act against enemies of the realm. Slavery may be legal in some provinces, but trafficking in persons kidnapped from crown territories is treason." Arya stared at him, seeing this man she'd grown to care for in an entirely new light. "You're a knight. I gave up my active commission when I started this work, but the authority remains." And Cassius made a critical error. He put his threat in writing. With his seal, Marcus held up the letter. "This is a confession." Despite his confident words, Arya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept drifting to his sword hilt. "But you're worried." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Not of him, of losing you, of watching you disappear back into that darkness." The honesty of his fear touched something deep inside her. Without thinking, she crossed the room and took his hands in hers. His skin was warm, calloused from swordwork, steady despite the tremor of worry she could feel beneath the surface. "Then don't let me go," she said simply. "Arya, I'm not helpless. Marcus, I wasn't always a slave. Before the raiders came, I worked in my father's forge. I know how to fight, how to defend myself. They took that away from me, convinced me, was weak, but I'm not. I'm not weak, and I'm not going to run." Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to admiration, then to something deeper. "You want to fight. I want to be free. Really free. Not just rescued, not just protected, but truly free, to choose my own path. And I choose to stand with you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Finally, he nodded. "Then we'll need to prepare. Cassius won't come alone, and he won't fight fair. What do you need me to do? Can you still work a forge?" The question surprised her. "Yes, but then help me make weapons. And armor. If we're going to face Cassius Blackheart, we'll need every advantage we can get." That afternoon, they rode to the estate's blacksmith shop, a well-equipped forge that Marcus had built but rarely used. As Arya examined the tools, memories flooded back. Her father's patient instruction, The satisfaction of shaping metal to her will. The pride in creating something both beautiful and functional. "What are we making?" she asked, already reaching for the bellows. "Insurance," Marcus replied, pulling out detailed drawings. "Cassius thinks he's hunting a soft merchant and a broken slave. Let's show him what a knight and a blacksmith's daughter can do." As the forge blazed to life, Arya felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The fierce joy of reclaiming herself. The girl who had been sold like livestock was gone. In her place stood a woman who would forge her own freedom, one hammer, blow at a time. The ring of hammer on anvil filled the air as Arya worked, her movements gradually finding their old rhythm. Marcus watched in fascination as she transformed raw iron into something beautiful and deadly, a blade that would serve as both weapon and symbol of her reclaimed identity. "You're incredible," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "I've never seen craftsmanship like this." Arya paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "My father always said that good metalwork requires 3 things: skill, patience, and heart. The first 2 can be taught. The third—" She held up the emerging blade, examining its edge in the firelight. "The third comes from knowing what you're fighting for." "And what are you fighting for?" She met his eyes across the forge. "The right to choose my own future. The right to love without fear. The right to be more than what others tried to make me." The word love hung in the air between them, unspoken, but understood. Marcus set down his own worker set of lightweight armor, designed for mobility rather than heavy protection, and moved closer. "Arya," he said softly, "you know that whatever happens with Cassius, whatever comes next, you don't owe me anything. Your freedom isn't conditional on stop." She held up a hand, silencing him. "Do you think I don't know the difference between gratitude and love? Between obligation and choice? I think you've been through trauma that can make those distinctions difficult to pass. And I think you're afraid to believe that someone could love you for who you are, not just what you've done for them." The accusation hit home. She could see it in the way he flinched, the way his carefully controlled expression cracked for just a moment. "I've spent 7 years defining myself by this mission. I don't know who I am without it." "Then let me tell you who I see." Arya set down her hammer and moved to face him fully. "I see a man who could have used his wealth and power for purely selfish ends, but chose to help others instead. I see someone who treats his servants like family, who reads poetry in 3 languages, who gets up before dawn to tend his horses because he enjoys their company." She stepped closer, close enough to touch. "I see a man who bought my freedom, expecting nothing in return, who's patient enough to let me heal at my own pace, who's brave enough to face one of the most dangerous men in the kingdom, rather than let me be taken again." "Arya, I see the man I love," she said simply. "Not the knight, not the rescuer, not the crusader against slavery, just Marcus." "Is that so hard to believe?" Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. It was different from the careful, hesitant touches they'd shared before. This was urgent, desperate, filled with all the longing and fear and hope that had been building between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," he whispered against her forehead. "I've loved you since the day I saw you refuse to let them break your spirit. I just didn't know if I had the right to tell you." "You have the right to tell me anything," she said. "And I have the right to listen or not, to accept or not, to choose or not. That's what freedom means." They worked together through the night, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools or adjusted pieces. The physical labor was soothing, meditative, but underneath ran a current of anticipation, not just for the confrontation with Cassius, but for the future they were forging together, one decision at a time. As dawn approached, Alina appeared with food and fresh clothes. "The men you sent for have arrived," she told Marcus. "They're waiting in the Great Hall." Marcus nodded, then looked at Arya. "My former brothers-in-arms. I sent word to 5 men I trust absolutely. They'll help us face Cassius, but only if you're comfortable with." "I want to meet them," Arya interrupted. "If they're your friends, I want to know who's standing with us." The 5 men waiting in the Great Hall were a formidable group, veterans, all with the easy camaraderie of soldiers who'd fought together and survived. They greeted Marcus with genuine warmth, but their eyes kept drifting to Arya with barely concealed curiosity. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, "this is Arya. She's the reason we're here, but she's also the reason we're going to win." "No offense, Marcus," said a grizzled man with silver hair and scars across his knuckles, "but we're talking about Cassius Blackheart. What can one woman do against his army?" Arya stepped forward, carrying the blade she'd finished just hours before. With a fluid motion, she threw it across the room, where it buried itself in the wooden beam. exactly where she'd aimed it. Throw that would have been impossible without perfect balance and expert craftsmanship. I can forge weapons that won't break, she said calmly. I can plan defenses that will hold. And I can fight beside you as an equal, not as someone who needs protecting. The silver-haired man whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. Marcus, you found yourself a warrior. No, Marcus said, his voice filled with pride and love. She found herself. Cassius Blackheart arrived at dawn 3 days later, his black ships darkening the horizon like storm clouds. From the watchtower of Marcus's estate, Arya counted at least 200 mercenaries, slavers, and cutthroats who served the most feared man in the slave trade. He's not taking any chances, Marcus observed, lowering his spyglass. He's brought enough firepower to level a small city. Good, Arya said, surprising him with her calm tone. Let him think he needs overwhelming force. It means he's more afraid of us than he's willing to admit. The defenses they'd prepared over the past 3 days were subtle but effective. The estate's seemingly peaceful grounds now concealed a network of traps, hidden weapons caches, and strategic positions that would turn any assault into a nightmare for attackers. Marcus's 5 companions had proven their worth, each bringing unique skills. Garrett the archer, whose arrows could find their mark from impossible distances. Tomas the strategist, who could read terrain like a book. Eric, the demolitions expert, who had a gift for creative destruction. Samuel the healer, whose medical knowledge had saved them all at various times. And Matthias the scout, who seemed to disappear and reappear at will. He's sending a messenger, Matthias reported, appearing at the top of the tower with his characteristic lack of sound. Single rider, white flag. Marcus nodded. Let him come. Arya, I should be there when you receive him, she finished. This is about me, remember? I have a right to hear what he has to say. The messenger was a thin man with nervous eyes and the pallor of someone who spent too much time indoors. He dismounted in the estate's courtyard, his gaze darting around, as if expecting an ambush at any moment. Marcus Thorne, he called out, his voice carrying the formal cadence of a man delivering a prepared speech. I bring word from Cassius Blackheart, Lord of the Western Seas and master of the trade routes. Marcus stepped forward, Arya at his side. I'm listening. My master offers terms. Return the stolen property, pay compensation of 500 gold pieces for the inconvenience, and he will depart peacefully. Refuse, and he will take what is his by right of purchase, along with everything else of value on this estate. I see, Marcus said mildly. And what does your master consider stolen property? The messenger's eyes flicked to Arya. The red-haired woman. She was purchased legally at market. Her current situation constitutes theft. Arya stepped forward before Marcus could respond. I have a name, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. I am Arya Blacksmith, daughter of Thomas and Catherine of Thornfield. I was kidnapped from my home, trafficked against my will, and sold into slavery, without my consent. The only theft here is what was taken from me. The messenger blinked, clearly unprepared for a response from what he'd assumed was property rather than a person. That is, my master's position is that your master's position is irrelevant, Marcus interrupted. I am Sir Marcus Thorne, Knight of the Silver Rose, and I have evidence that Cassius Blackheart has engaged in trafficking persons kidnapped from Crown territories. That makes him a traitor to the realm. My master disputes. Your master put his confession in writing, Arya said, producing the letter Cassius had sent. His seal, his signature, his admission that he considers me his property. The only problem is that citizens of the Crown cannot be property, and Thornfield is Crown territory. The messenger's face went pale. You're refusing the terms. We're offering different terms, Marcus said. Cassius withdraws immediately and permanently. Ceases all operations in Crown territories, and pays reparations to his victims. In exchange, we don't present his confession to the royal court. He'll never accept that. Then he'll face the consequences of his choices, Arya said. Just as I'm facing mine. After the messenger left, Marcus turned to her with a mixture of admiration and concern. You realize what you've just done. You've declared war on the most powerful slaver in the kingdom. No, Arya corrected. I've declared that I'm not afraid of him anymore. There's a difference. As they watched the messenger's horse gallop back toward the ships, Garrett joined them on the estate's main terrace. He'll attack tonight, the archer said with certainty. Cassius isn't known for his patience, and you've just humiliated him in front of his men. Good, Marcus said. Let him come angry. Angry men make mistakes. And if he doesn't make mistakes? Arya asked. Marcus took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Then we'll make our own opportunities. Together. As the sun set over the estate, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Arya felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring violence, danger, possibly death. But tonight, she was exactly where she chose to be, with the man she loved, fighting for a future worth having. No matter what happens, she said quietly, I want you to know that these weeks with you have been the freest I've ever felt. It's not over, Marcus replied. We're going to win this, and then we're going to build something beautiful together. Promise me. I promise, he said, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted like hope and defiance and the fierce joy of choosing love over fear. The attack came at midnight. Just as Garrett had predicted, Cassius's forces moved like a dark tide across the estate grounds, their torches bobbing in the darkness like malevolent stars. From her position in the main house, Arya watched through a window as the first wave of attackers triggered the traps she and Marcus had carefully prepared. Explosions lit the night as Eric's handiwork sent mercenaries scrambling for cover. Hidden pits opened beneath running feet, and caltrops scattered across the paths found their marks. The attackers' confident advance quickly devolved into chaos, as they realized the peaceful estate had become a battlefield designed to neutralize their numerical advantage. First blood to us, Marcus said, appearing at her side with his sword already drawn. But they'll adapt quickly. Cassius didn't build his empire by giving up after the first setback. Through the chaos, Arya spotted him, Cassius Blackheart himself, unmistakable even in the darkness. He was a large man, heavily built, with the kind of presence that commanded attention even among hardened criminals. He stood well back from the fighting, directing his forces with calm precision despite the setbacks. He's not just a slaver, she realized. He's a tactician. Which makes him dangerous, Marcus agreed. But also predictable. He'll pull back, regroup, and try a different approach. As if summoned by their words, the attackers began to retreat, regrouping beyond the range of the estate's defenses. Cassius's voice carried across the night air, issuing orders in a tone that brooked no argument. They're going to try to burn us out, Tomas said, joining them at the window. Look, they're bringing up torches and oil. The buildings are stone, Arya pointed out. They'll have trouble getting a fire started. Not the buildings, Marcus said grimly. The olive groves. If they can create a fire barrier, they can smoke us out while staying safely out of range. Arya felt a surge of anger at the thought of the beautiful trees being destroyed, not just for their economic value, but for the sheer malice of destroying something that had taken decades to grow. We can't let them. We can't stop them from out here, Samuel said practically. There are too many of them, and they're too spread out. Then we don't stop them from out here, Arya said, an idea forming. We stop them from in there. Marcus looked at her sharply. Absolutely not. Whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that I know something about fire and metal that they don't. She interrupted. And I'm thinking that I'm the only one here small enough to move through the groves without being seen. It's suicide. It's necessary. She turned to face him fully. Marcus, I love you. I love this place, these people, the life we're building together. But I won't let it be destroyed by a man who thinks he owns me. Before he could argue further, she was moving, slipping out through the kitchen entrance that opened onto the herb garden. The night air was cool against her skin, filled with the scent of lavender and rosemary, and the acrid smell of smoke from the earlier explosions. She moved through the shadows like a ghost, her feet finding the paths she'd walked dozens of times during peaceful evenings. The olive groves stretched out before her, their ancient trees silver-black in the moonlight. Already, she could see Cassius's men moving among them, splashing oil on the trunks and setting up torches. The weapon she'd forged, specifically for this moment, was a simple thing, a small crossbow loaded with specially designed bolts. Each bolt contained a mixture of her own devising. Iron filings, sulfur, and a few other ingredients that would create a very specific type of reaction. When exposed to flame dot, she took careful aim at the first group of arsonists. Her father's training, guiding her movements, the bolt flew true, striking the oil barrel they'd been using and creating a brilliant flash of light that sent them scrambling backward, temporarily blinded and confused. But her real target wasn't the men, it was Cassius himself. She could see him in the distance, still directing operations from what he thought was a safe position. He was wrong about a lot of things, but his greatest error was assuming that the blacksmith's daughter would cower in the house, while he destroyed everything she'd grown to love. She worked her way closer, using the confusion she'd created as cover. The specially designed bolts continued to find their marks, each one creating chaos and buying precious time for Marcus and his men to position themselves for what she hoped would be the final phase of the battle. When she was close enough to see the details of Cassius's face, she stood up from her concealment behind a storage shed. "Cassius Blackheart," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise and then narrowing in anger. "The runaway slave. How thoughtful of you to come to me." "I'm not a slave," Arya said calmly. "I'm a free woman, and I'm here to offer you one final chance to withdraw." Cassius laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're in no position to offer anything, girl. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and about to be recaptured." "Am I?" Arya smiled, raising her crossbow. "Tell me, Cassius, what do you know about metallurgy?" The bolt struck the ground at Cassius's feet, releasing a cloud of metallic dust that glittered in the torchlight. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Marcus's voice rang out across the estate, clear and commanding. Now, the night erupted in coordinated chaos. Garrett's arrows found their marks with deadly precision, each one taking down a key lieutenant in Cassius's forces. Eric's remaining explosive devices detonated in sequence, creating walls of fire that divided the attackers and prevented them from supporting each other. Tomas' carefully planned defensive positions suddenly revealed themselves as Marcus and his men emerged from concealment, turning the hunters into the hunted. But the real surprise was what happened to Cassius himself. The metallic dust Arya had released wasn't just a distraction, it was iron filings, mixed with a compound that would react violently with the torch he was holding. When the flame touched the cloud, it created a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded him and sent him stumbling backward. "Impossible," he snarled, drawing his sword despite his disorientation. "You're just a broken slave." "I was never broken," Arya replied, discarding her crossbow and drawing the blade she'd forged in Marcus's workshop. "I was just waiting for the right moment to remind you of that." The sword felt perfect in her hands, balanced, responsive, an extension of her will made manifest in steel. Her father had taught her to fight as well as to forge, understanding that in their world, a blacksmith needed to be able to defend their work and their family. Cassius recovered his vision quickly, proving that his reputation wasn't built on luck alone. He was a skilled swordsman, his blade moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd fought dozens of duels. But he was also overconfident, expecting to face a terrified victim rather than a woman who had reclaimed her strength. Their swords met in a shower of sparks, the ring of steel on steel cutting through the sounds of battle around them. Cassius was stronger, but Arya was faster, and she had something he lacked: absolute clarity of purpose. "You think you can defeat me?" Cassius growled, pressing forward with a series of heavy attacks. "I've killed men twice your size. I'm not trying to defeat you," Arya replied, parrying smoothly and countering with a strike that opened a shallow cut across his sword arm. "I'm trying to free myself from the fear of you." The words seemed to enrage him further. He abandoned technique in favor of brute force, swinging his sword like a club. It was exactly what Arya had been hoping for. She danced back, letting his momentum carry him past her, then struck with surgical precision. Her blade found the gap in his armor, sliding between ribs to pierce his lung. Not a killing blow, but a decisive one. Cassius dropped his sword, falling to his knees as blood frothed from his lips. "Impossible," he wheezed. "You're nothing. You're property." "I'm Arya Blacksmith," she said, standing over him with her sword still in hand. "Daughter of Thomas and Catherine of Thornfield, free woman of the crown, and the last person you'll ever try to own." Around them, the battle was ending. Cassius's men, seeing their leader fallen and their tactical advantage evaporated, began to surrender or flee. Marcus appeared at her side, his own sword bloodied, but his eyes focused entirely on her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders, checking for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him, then looked down at Cassius, who was struggling to breathe. "What do we do with him?" "He's dying," Samuel said, approaching with his medical kit. "The wound is too deep, too close to the heart. I could try to save him, but double quotes, but," Marcus prompted. "But he's killed hundreds of people, destroyed countless lives. Saving him means he'll face trial for treason, then execution. Either way, his story ends here." Arya looked at the man who had haunted her nightmares, who had represented everything she feared about losing her freedom. He seemed smaller now, more pathetic than terrifying. "Let him die," she said quietly. "But not alone." No one should die alone. She knelt beside him, her presence a final act of humanity towards someone who had shown her none. Cassius's eyes focused on her face, and for a moment, she saw not the monster of her fears, but a man who had chosen cruelty over compassion, and was now reaping the consequences. "Why?" he whispered, blood speckling his lips. "Because I choose to be better than you were," she replied simply. Cassius Blackheart died as the sun rose over the estate. His reign of terror ended by the woman he'd tried to reduce to property. As his body stilled, Arya felt something lift from her shoulders, not just the fear of this particular man, but the deeper fear that she could be unmade by what others tried to do to her. "It's over," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No," Arya replied, leaning back against his chest. "It's just beginning." The aftermath of battle revealed the true cost of freedom. Cassius's forces had been defeated, but not without casualties. 3 of the estate's workers had been killed in the fighting, and 2 of Marcus's companions, brave Eric and loyal Samuel, had fallen defending the main house. The weight of their sacrifice settled heavily on Arya's shoulders as she helped prepare their bodies for burial. "They died for me," she said, her voice hollow as she stood in the estate's small cemetery. "If I hadn't been here, if Marcus hadn't bought me, they died for what they believed in," Garrett corrected gently. "Eric told me once that he'd rather die fighting slavers than live knowing he'd done nothing to stop them." Samuel said the same thing. Marcus placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "The choice to fight was theirs, Arya, just as the choice to be here is yours." The funeral was simple but profound. The entire estate gathered to honor the fallen, sharing stories of their courage and sacrifice. Alina wept openly for Eric, who had been like a son to her. The other workers spoke of Samuel's kindness, his willingness to tend their injuries without payment or expectation of reward. "They were free men," Marcus said in his eulogy. "Free to choose their path, free to stand for what they believed in, free to decide that some things are worth dying for. That freedom, that choice is what makes their sacrifice meaningful." In the days that followed, visitors began arriving. Word of Cassius Blackheart's death had spread quickly through the kingdom's underground networks. Former slaves, freed by Marcus over the years, came to pay their respects and offer support. Officials from the crown arrived to investigate the incident, but Marcus's knighthood and the evidence of Cassius's crimes made their inquiries brief and sympathetic. Most significantly, representatives from several major trading houses arrived with offers to buy Cassius's former holdings, his fleet, his warehouses, his entire network of slave markets. All of it was up for sale, and Marcus had the resources to make a bid. "We could end it," he said to Arya, as they reviewed the proposals. "Buy everything, shut down the entire operation, free every slave in his network. That would cost everything you have," she pointed out. "The estate, the investments, all of it. It would be worth it." Arya studied the man she loved, seeing the passion in his eyes, the absolute commitment to his cause. It was one of the things she loved most about him, but it was also what worried her. And then what? We'd be free, but we'd be poor. We'd have ended this part of the slave trade, but there are others. There are always others. "Are you saying we shouldn't try?" "I'm saying we should be smart about it." She pulled out a different set of papers, plans she'd been working on in secret. "What if instead of buying everything to shut it down, we bought it to transform it?" Marcus examined her sketches and calculations with growing amazement. "You want to turn slave ships into merchant vessels? I want to turn the entire network into something productive. The ships become legitimate trading vessels, employing free sailors at fair wages. The warehouses become distribution centers for goods produced by free workers. The markets become places where people sell their labor by choice, not by force." "It's ambitious," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "But it would still require almost everything we have." "Not everything," Arya corrected. "Everything you have. I have something to contribute to." She showed him the final element of her plan, a detailed proposal for a new type of business. A network of smithies and workshops, all employing former slaves who've been trained in useful trades. We'd provide the initial investment, the training, the connections to markets. Within 5 years, it would be profitable enough to fund further expansion. Marcus stared at the papers, then at her. "You've been planning this for weeks." "I've been planning this since the day you freed me," she admitted. "I knew that personal freedom wasn't enough, that real freedom means having the power to change the system that enslaved you in the first place. And you want to do this together." "I want to do this as equals," she said. "Not as rescuer and rescued, not as master and grateful servant, but as partners who shared the same vision for the future. Marcus set down the papers and took her hands in his. "Arya Blacksmith, will you marry me?" The proposal caught her off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "Is this about the business partnership?" "This is about spending the rest of my life with the most remarkable woman I've ever met. This is about building something beautiful together, both personally and professionally. This is about choosing love over fear, hope over despair, creation over destruction." She looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw her own hopes reflected. "There, yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be your partner in all things. Yes, I'll help you change the world." Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A messenger was riding hard toward the estate, his horse lathered with sweat and his face urgent with news. "Sir Marcus," he called out, dismounting quickly. "I bring word from the capital. The crown has issued a decree all slave trading is now forbidden throughout the kingdom. The king himself has declared it an offense against human dignity." Marcus and Arya exchanged glances. The political implications were staggering. "What prompted this decision?" Marcus asked. "Your report on Cassius Blackheart's activities, sir. The evidence you provided convinced the crown that the slave trade had become a threat to the stability of the realm. The king has also established a royal commission to investigate other trafficking operations." As the messenger rode away, Arya felt a sense of wonder at how quickly the world could change. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it. We started it," Marcus corrected. "The real work is just beginning." 5 years later, the wedding took place in the olive groves of Marcus's estate, under trees that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward love and their fierce battle for freedom. Arya wore a gown of deep blue silk, the color of the dress Alina had given her on her first night of freedom, but cut in a style that was entirely her own choosing. Marcus stood waiting beneath an arch of olive branches and white roses, his face radiant with joy and anticipation. Beside him stood Garrett, Tomas, and Matthias, the surviving members of his old company, now partners in their expanding enterprise. Alina wept happy tears as she watched the woman she'd come to love like a daughter walk down the aisle. The most meaningful witnesses were the dozens of former slaves who had found new lives through the network Arya and Marcus had built together. Master craftsmen who had once been property, ship captains who had once worn chains, merchants who had once been sold like livestock. Their presence transformed the ceremony from a simple wedding into a celebration of human dignity reclaimed. "We gather today," said the priest, "not just to witness the joining of two hearts, but to celebrate the triumph of love over fear, hope over despair, choice over compulsion." As they exchanged vows, Arya reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The terrified girl who had stood on the auction block was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to forge her own destiny. The bitter knight who had defined himself only by his mission had become a man who understood that the greatest victories were won not through vengeance, but through the patient work of building something better. "I promise," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the grove, "to stand beside you as an equal, to support your dreams as I hope you'll support mine, and to remember always that our love is a choice we make every day." "I promise," Arya replied, "to never let fear make my choices for me, to use my freedom to help others find theirs, and to build with you a life worthy of the sacrifices made to give us this chance." The celebration that followed lasted until dawn, filled with music, laughter, and stories of transformation. Former slaves shared tales of their new lives, the baker who now owned 3 shops, the seamstress whose designs were sought after by nobility, the sailor who had become the captain of his own vessel. But the most moving speech came from Alina, who had become the unofficial mother of their extended family. "I've watched love bloom in this house," she said, raising her cup. "Not just between Marcus and Arya, but between all of us who've found sanctuary here. This estate has become what every home should be, a place where people are valued for who they are, not what they can be forced to do." As the sun rose over the olive groves, Marcus and Arya stood together on the terrace of the main house, watching their guests begin to disperse. The estate bustled with activity, not the desperate energy of battle, but the peaceful productivity of free people choosing their own work. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, wrapping his arms around his new wife. "Only that my parents aren't here to see this," Arya replied. "They would have loved you. They would have been proud of you, the woman you've become, the difference you've made." "The difference we've made," she corrected. Together, in the distance, they could see the latest addition to their network, a training center where former slaves learned new trades, funded by the profits from their legitimate businesses. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that wealth originally built on human misery was now being used to restore human dignity. "What's next?" Arya asked. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "For the first time in years, I don't have a grand mission. No burning injustice that demands immediate action. I think, I think I might like to try just being happy." "Just being happy," Arya repeated, tasting the words. "I like the sound of that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up around them. The estate was peaceful now, but it was the peace of completion rather than surrender. They had fought for their freedom, won it, and learned to use it wisely. Marcus Aurelius said eventually, "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? That I was safe. I remember. I didn't believe you then. I thought safety was just another kind of cage. And now I understand that safety isn't the absence of danger, it's the presence of choice. The knowledge that whatever comes, we'll face it together, as free people who've learned to forge our own path." Marcus turned her in his arms, looking into the green eyes that had first captivated him in a slave market, and now promised him a lifetime of partnership and love. "Together," he agreed, as they kissed. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the olive groves where they had first dared to hope for something more than survival. The trees bore witness to their love, their struggle, their victory, and their promise of forever. The girl who had been sold like an animal was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to forge her own freedom. The knight who had defined himself by his mission had become a man who understood that the greatest quest was the simple, daily choice to love and be loved in return. And in the distance, carried on the morning breeze, came the sound of hammers on anvils, the music of creation, the rhythm of hope, the heartbeat of a world where freedom was no longer a dream, but a reality forged by those brave enough to claim it. They had tried to sell her like an animal. Instead, they had inadvertently sold her to the man who would help her remember she was human. And in remembering her own humanity, she had helped him rediscover his. The story of their love was also the story of their freedom, not just from chains and slavery, but from the fear that had once defined them both. They had learned that true freedom wasn't just the absence of oppression, but the presence of choice, love, and the courage to build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. In the end, they had won more than their freedom. They had won the right to choose their own story, to write their own ending, to forge their own forever. And it was, in every sense of the word, a happy ending, not because it was easy, but because it was earned through courage, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that love was stronger than fear, hope more powerful than despair, and freedom more valuable than any price that could be paid for it. The hammer had fallen, but this time, it was the hammer of the forge, shaping something beautiful and lasting from the raw materials of human dignity and love. And in that workshop of the heart, Arya and Marcus would continue to create wonders for the rest of their days. Two free souls, who had learned that the greatest masterpiece of all was a life lived in service to each other and to the cause of human freedom. In the years that followed, the network they built would free thousands more from slavery, transform the economics of an entire region, and prove that love and determination could indeed change the world. But that is a story for another day. This story ends where all the best stories do, with two people who found in each other not just love, but the courage to be truly free.